Recording. Okay, sorry about that. Um, so I guess I'll just start out like, can you introduce like Boston Children's Hospital, their bereavement program, and just explain like your core values and your mission?
Yeah. So I jotted down some notes. So if you see me looking away, it's just kind of to remember some of those pieces. But essentially, the mission of our Boston Children's Hospital bereavement program is to provide comprehensive and sensitive bereavement care throughout the hospital community. So that includes all of our patients who have died in the hospital, or who are patients of ours but have died in the community, whether that home or in hospice or at their local hospital, since we have a lot of patients who come from out of state as well. We established the hospital-based bereavement program back in 2013, and it was largely an effort to try and standardize our bereavement care within the institution, and try and make sure that all patients receive the same level, kind of a standard level of bereavement follow-up, and that we were offering education, guidance, and support, and centralizing all of that within the institution. I think overall we were trying to also address, being addressing the primary grief loss of the child, but also the secondary loss of losing the hospital family, right? For people who had been treated, whose child had been treated at our institution for potentially their entire life. Um, you know, Also trying to help connect and link families with other families who are also bereaved. And so we probably have roughly between 200 and 250 patients that die every year. And we really want to just try and help them navigate their grief as they move through the lifelong journey of grief, and to try and potentially improve their clinical outcomes, as well as their really kind of support their relationship with the hospital even after their child has died.
Mhm. So this is kind of a question that I just thought of off the top of my
Yeah.
head. So with a lot of the organizations that I've talked to in the past, they kind of have like a 2 or 3 month break in between when the event actually happened to when they actually bring people in and start talking to them about joining the program and stuff like that. But obviously, I think it's sort of different for you, of course, because you're right there. So
Mhm.
how do you guys, I guess, go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our program is accessible to families at any time. So what we say is that, we tend to offer our programs kind of seasonally, right? So at the time of somebody's loss, we may not have a program available right away, right? But we can talk to them about when our upcoming programs are available and when the right timing may be for them to enter in. Sometimes people want to come in very early and then realize it's too early. Sometimes people feel like they don't need additional support and then they come back around, potentially like a year, 18 months, 24 months later. We don't have a timetable on our services. So we say if you were a your child was treated at our institution, you are eligible to be part of our services and programs at any point in time, whenever that feels ready for you. So that might be for some families 3 or 4 years out. And, it really is dependent on the individual themselves.
Hmm. So, especially I guess for Boston Children's Hospital, how is grieving different for children and adolescents compared to adults, especially when it involves like medical loss or trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Overall, people often tend to think that children don't grieve, right? So that, they don't understand what's going on, that, children are very resilient and they're just going to bounce back. And the reality is that there are some differences in grieving among children versus adults. We know that children oscillate a lot in their grief. So at one moment, they can be very, very sad, and then they can come to you and say, they want a snack and then they can go outside to play, right? But they often process a lot of their grief through play, and they do need these opportunities for connection and kind of just acting out their grief, or kind of showing other people what they're thinking and feeling. Um, but it all goes back to the fact that, where a child is developmentally, right? So their understanding, their experience, and their coping of death is going to be impacted by their cognitive and psychosocial development. So, through play and art, we see their grief show up a lot. Um, you know, We see regressive behaviors at times, maybe trouble sleeping, somatic symptoms, tantrums. In the hospital, there's a lot of art therapy or like playing hospital, kind of showing images of what they understand, but it's all very normal, right? And how they try to make sense of their experience. We also know that for children too, they often tend to re-grieve over time, which is kind of another process that I think people fail to understand is that if you have a loss at the age of, 3, 4, 5, right? Then when you kind of reach another level of understanding what it means to die conceptually, then you kind of process it again in a different way. And then as a teenager, you're going to process your loss in different ways as you start to think about what that primary loss, how that affects the secondary losses of your life, right? Like loss of future, loss of things that, having a parent or a sibling at your graduation or at your wedding, right? So all of those things are very normal. It's just that I think it can be scary to think that your child is going to be grieving for the rest of their life, right?
Mhm.
When in fact we know that for every individual, everybody grieves for the entirety of their life for that individual, or has the potential to, I should say. But for children, it just has that added complexity of until they reach that like mature brain,
Mhm.
developmentally, they're going to think about it more and more in different ways.
So you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but like how do you tailor your approach when supporting children at those different developmental stages? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I will like fully acknowledge too that the hospital-based program, we focus our interventions on parents and caregivers, right? So the majority of our programs are for parents and caregivers of children. Our groups, our workshops, our seminars. We do have family-based events, however, right? So we have an annual memorial service for families to come back every spring to try and honor their child through this memorial service. We have a big Keeping Connections family conference in the fall, and siblings are invited to be part of that as well, right? And a lot of that is also to help instill the idea of kind of memorializing, maintaining connections, maintaining bonds with your loved one, having opportunities at that family conference to engage in kind of art activities, other ways of kind of more expressive opportunities, and carving out some time, which families, I think, sometimes struggle with knowing how to create that time at home, right? And they need the guidance and the space at times for it to happen in another space. But then it can allow organically some of these children to be able to talk a little bit more about their brother or sister, right? And kind of engage in those kinds of conversations. So that's kind of how we try and allow for more opportunities, generally speaking. We are trying to expand our programming as well. We just have to, we're a little bit limited in terms of human resources, financial resources, things like that. Um, but we have been creating more collaborations with some of the agencies that you had spoken with. And so two of those also have included engaging in some family night activities, hosting those so that families can come together and do different types of art and remembrance activities on behalf of their loved one.
Hmm. So you talked a little bit about those family activities. What role do you think like collaboration plays in grief support?
I think it plays a huge role. I think like, again, as I said, in Massachusetts, there are a lot of organizations that do bereavement work. But as you probably also know, each one kind of has a specific mission or your
Hmm.
eligibility is variable, right?
Hmm.
So, at the children's room, you have to have a surviving child within the family to be eligible for services. For our organization, if your one and only child has died, you don't need to have a surviving child to be eligible for services. And so I think every place, and again, geographically, it might be more realistic for people to access one place, but maybe you don't meet the criteria than
Hmm.
another, right? So I do think collaborations are very important. I think, again, because of the uniqueness of each agency and kind of how to be true to their mission while still trying to service the bereaved population at the same time. Um, and so, we've also been trying to think about, are there ways that we can work with other agencies to expand our reach, right? Which is another
Hmm.
reason that we partnered with the Parmenter Foundation submitted for the grant and received a grant this past year to be able to say, we want to reach more people, we want to collaborate more with agencies who are also invested in the work, and how do we, potentially put programs forward that where maybe a family doesn't meet the other agency's criteria, but they meet our criteria, and then we
Hmm.
can kind of, service more people at one time. So,
Hmm. So pivoting a little bit, so my main focus so far has been grief support in schools.
yeah.
Obviously that differs a little bit from your focus because mine's a little bit more on like the student side of things, and yours is a little bit more on the parent side of things, I guess. Um, and so I guess this question is like take it how you want it, sort of, but like, what do you think are some of the best practices for integrating like grief sensitivity into a school, for like mental health efforts?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think a lot just starts with general grief education, right?
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
that people often think that they are grief informed, but I think they rely on what society tells you about what grief looks like, right? And
Hmm.
so there's just so much outdated information, right? People still talk about Kubler-Ross all the time and the stages of grief and this linear process. And there's so much, myths and misconceptions, as I often
Hmm.
say, about what grief really looks like. And so I just feel like starting with general grief education within schools is highly important. Just the idea that people just think over time you'll get over this is still something that's commonly said. When we know that, in the grief informed side, we know that time itself does not heal grief. It doesn't change it. We know that people are really just looking for ways to integrate loss into their everyday lives, and that there's never going to be this specific endpoint that they're trying to reach. And so, again, yeah, I just think it really starts with education. And I think not only in schools, but everywhere, even within the hospital systems, there's a lot of perpetuation around these misconceptions, and misunderstandings about what grief looks like, what loss, what the implications of loss are. Um, and again, as we had already said, like what grief looks like for children versus adults. There really isn't a proper understanding of the distinctions and how to best support that for individuals. So yeah, I would say that that's of primary importance.
Hmm. So you touched on a lot of these themes already, but why do you think that grief is such a difficult topic to talk about?
Um, Again, I think that there's just a lot of these assumptions about loss and grief, and they're shaped really early on, right? When children are young, um, you watch movies and you see TV shows, and there's family attitudes and past experiences. And so, in generations past, people just didn't talk about loss at all, right?
Hmm.
And then, or based on certain cultural or religious groups, it is felt that, it may be felt that, talking about grief then makes you saturated in grief rather than trying to move beyond it. So it's still kind of it's strange because loss is so ubiquitous with everybody,
Hmm.
but then grief itself is still a very taboo subject, right?
Hmm.
And there's just a lot of grief illiteracy in our culture. So we've kind of created these very narrow views about what grief should look like. So I often find, I think it helps, it leads us to kind of feed into these myths and misconceptions even more, right? There's
Hmm.
also a lot of judgment about grief, I think, right? Like we talk a lot about, it's been a year. Why aren't they over it? They weren't really that close. So why are they so upset by this loss? Or, and then I think there's a lot of self-judgment that happens because you kind of look around and say, people, I should be over it. That's what it's been this many months, this many years, and why am I not over it? But, you know, from a perspective of we are working with families who have lost their child, right? Any
Hmm.
type of loss is extremely difficult. But if you think about the idea that someone would ever get over the loss of their child, regardless of how long it has been, I mean, it's an unfathomable thought, right? And
Hmm.
so, um, it, I don't know, it just brings up the fact that grief is a topic that's really hard for people to talk about. They just don't know what to say. And then again, because of that, people just don't say anything at all, or they
Hmm.
tend to say a lot of things that amplify people's grief and sadness. So,
Hmm. So one idea that you touched on there is sort of like the isolation side of things, where people feel like
yeah,
I'm maybe the only one going through this, even though it's such a wide range of grief. It's almost like a spectrum, right? So
yeah.
what would you say to students who feel isolated in their grief, or they're like afraid to open up?
Yeah, I mean, I would really just say that, again, loss is incredibly ubiquitous, right? It
Hmm.
is hard to know any individual who hasn't been touched by a loss somewhere along their life. Um, so I think normalizing the experience of, feeling alone and not feeling like you can talk to a lot of people about it, but that there is also great value in connecting with other people who are going through loss. It's incredibly powerful. I think once you find other people who have been through a loss experience, that you can, find that connection of they understand where I'm coming from without having so that they don't necessarily say the things that other people in my life do that, exacerbate my grief, right?
Hmm.
Um, so again, I think just normalizing where they're coming from, but also letting them know that there are so many individuals out there and that it could be a very powerful experience for them to be able to have the opportunity to connect with other people who are going through loss.
Hmm. And then this is a little bit of a personal question, but
Yeah.
what kind of like inspires you to do your work or the work that you do?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've worked at the hospital for a long time. I've been there for 20 years already. And the first kind of half of my career, I worked in med-surg ICU. So I really saw people who were critically ill
Hmm.
and a lot of people who died during that time. And my job was really to provide support to families who were grieving their loss, the anticipated loss of their child. And then I spent a long time working in transplant care, where we kind of saw
Hmm.
both sides of the spectrum, right? We saw a lot of people who had a second opportunity at life, and then there were, unfortunately, a lot of our patients who didn't survive their illness, or so we saw both of that. And I think at this point, I think it continues to be that desire to support what I see as a disenfranchised population, right?
Hmm.
I see bereaved individuals as not necessarily fully seen and appreciated, right? And that they need a very specialized type of support and care that not everyone can provide. I think again, everybody wants to be supportive. I don't always know that they have the right, you know, experience or interventions or know necessarily what to do. And we do see a lot of conflation of like how to support people at the end of their life and thinking that that is the same as long-term bereavement work.
Hmm.
So I think they run parallel, but there is again a lot more nuance and a lot of pieces that you learn about bereavement care. I think that are critical to understand and that we learn all the time from our bereaved families. There's a lot of
Hmm.
learning that we do just from the programs that we run with bereaved families. And I think that, I don't know, there's a lot of really powerful work that is done there, and what they have to share with us about their lived experience of what grief looks like.
Hmm. So, where do you see like the future of bereavement care going?
I don't know. I think we're in a very unique time of bereavement care. I think that there's a lot more attention on it right now. I think
Hmm.
that people are beginning to understand the importance of recognizing how to support grievers, right? And wanting to do that hard work. I think there is that. Um, so I think it's a lot of trying to lean into that
Hmm.
and trying to increase awareness and figure out how to tap into resources that help us better support individuals. Um, because I think especially too, like when you think about COVID and all of the increased isolation and all of the grief and loss that have happened over the past 5 years and how challenging that has been, I just think it's a pretty raw time for people who are grieving not just death losses, but other types of losses as well. So I do think that it's a very unique time that people are starting to think about it a little bit more. My hope is that we can kind of keep pushing that forward. Um, you know, there's a lot of things right now, like, I'm sure you've heard of prolonged grief disorder,
Hmm.
and, there's some controversy around that. And I think it's just a unique time to think about, just to point attention to it and really try and normalize it and make it, kind of move us into a time where it just doesn't feel so taboo or so hard to talk about what grief and loss look like for people. That's my hope.
Hmm. And so I don't mean to put you on the spot with this question, but do you have like a moment or story of your time working in bereavement that you like carry with you?
Um, Honestly, I feel like I have a lot. I can't pinpoint anything specifically, but I would just say that when we run our groups and when we hold our events, each one of those is incredibly powerful in different ways. I think the hearing the ability, I don't know. Sometimes it's just about seeing people show up at these
Hmm.
groups and workshops, which can be really hard for people, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that they find, even an hour of comfort, right? Connecting with other people. I think also witnessing kind of both the simultaneous pain and joy that people have in talking about the person that they lost, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that's the other piece is, you know, one of the big things is people don't talk about individuals who have died because they're constantly worried that they're going to make people more upset by bringing them up, right? And we do know that, it's all about living in the and, right? That there is pain associated with thinking about someone who's died, and then there's a lot of joy that can also be created by thinking about that person as well. And
Hmm.
so I feel like when we facilitate these groups, we see that we're able to be witness to that experience. We can hear people articulate in these amazing ways about, how they can describe their experience to us about how much they love their child. When we see these events and workshops, and you see, it's just like a palpable experience. And so, um, I don't know, all of them kind of resonate with me
Hmm.
in different ways. It's hard to pinpoint one specifically.
Hmm. So the way I kind of end all of my interviews is by asking the person what kind of gives them hope in the work they do, but you've kind of already covered all of that. So
Yeah.
instead, I would like to ask you a different question. If there was like one main takeaway that people could take away from your experiences and all the things that you've learned over the years in bereavement care, what would that one thing be?
Mm.
Feel free to take your time.
Can you say that? You asked the question one more time? So.
So if there was one key takeaway that people could take away from this interview and all the work that and experiences that you've had in bereavement care, and of course you explained your path earlier, but if there's just like one
Mhm.
takeaway that you think would be important for people to know.
Just one thing. That's really hard. Um,
You can do more than one, of course. It doesn't have
okay.
to only be.
Um, I think, I guess it would be the learning the value of hearing stories, right?
Hmm.
From the lived experiences and stories of people who have gone through a tremendous loss. Um, and kind of seeing the what the shared experiences are, like trying to learn and understand what the shared experiences are between all people who have gone through a loss, as well as the individualized pieces, right? Because we know that
Yeah.
grief, there are universal themes, but grief is highly individualized, right?
Hmm.
And, based on a lot of different things, but that I don't know. It's just a profound experience to be able to be witness to and to support people who are going through such an incredible loss, but who are still able to share that experience with other individuals with the hope that they can teach, others what it means to support others or be there, or how they could, family and friends can be better supportive to them. Um, I think that's pretty significant. And again, I think just the importance and value of becoming grief informed and leaning on individuals who do this work a lot and really
Hmm.
learning from them about how to better care for those individuals, whether it be school providers who are able to really recognize and support their students in better ways, and healthcare providers who can better support their families who are, there is an anticipated loss, but also even on the other side of that, kind of being still available to those families who become so connected with them,
Hmm.
as their child is being treated. So,
Yeah. Well, we've kind of reached the end of my questions, so I just want to say thank you so much
yeah,
for joining me today and sharing your insight. And then also thank you so much for all the great work you and the Boston Children's Hospital do.
absolutely. If you have any other questions, just feel free to reach out. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Sid. Bye.